that monotony and talk about the other side of the coin. We will actually look at three very pertinent concepts that drive decision-making, prospect theory. I will always go after the sure win and try to minimize my losses. The availability heuristic is a tendency to actually make decisions very quickly, information that's quickly available and easily comes to our mind. Bounded rationality says that all of us as individuals actually take decisions within constraints. It's a problem with the way we think, we respond, and we act. What we need is a nudge. A nudge gives me choices, but a coercion forces me to accept a certain stand because my leadership has accepted the stand. Our irrational behaviors are neither random nor are they just about a point in time. They are systematic and predictable. These are the words of Dan Ariely, the famous behavioral economist and psychologist, who is widely known for his work on irrationality in human decision-making. Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to be back here at Cypher, and what a great spectacle Cypher 2025 is. That video that you just saw was a reminder. On the Cypher stage 2 years ago, we talked about why AI adoption most often lags. It is not because the models are weak, but because human decision-making is messy, it's biased, and beautifully irrational. But the story has actually not changed much in the last 2 years, despite all the great innovations that we have seen, despite the generative AI wave that came, and now we are sitting in agentic AI, and I'm sure there's a lot more going to come in. In fact, just a few months ago, a Fortune 500 bank scrapped a multi-million-dollar AI program, not because of technical reasons, but because the frontline employees could not trust the recommendations. So despite billions being poured into AI, the hard truth is this. Most AI projects do not scale beyond pilots. And as I said, it is because of the way human behavior and human decision-making happens. It's irrational, it's biased, it's full of fear, there is cultural inertia. These are the bottlenecks. Yet we keep throwing GPUs at a problem that is fundamentally human. Gartner calls it the last mile problem. I call it the first mile mistake, the failure to embed adoption into the design from day one. Now, if we were to actually understand how behavior works and therefore be able to identify what should be done in order to make adoption scale, we need certain models, we need certain frameworks, and a deep understanding of human thinking itself per se. So today, I am not here to spin doomsday scenarios or to tell you narratives about AI ethics. I'm here to give you an AI blueprint that will tell us how AI has to work with human nature and not against it. So what you see here on the screen right now is the famous Fogg model developed by Dr. B.J. Fogg, a Stanford academician and researcher. Dr. Fogg says that for any human behavior to actually happen and occur, motivation, ability, and prompts need to come together at the same time. And mind you, prompts are not the prompts the way we are conditioned to think about it. These are not the generative AI prompts. These are sparks that help human beings move along the curve that you see here. So let's contextualize this for AI adoption. On the horizontal axis, you see AI motivation. So this is basically openness at the bottom, where individuals in an organization are just willing to try AI. Then they move towards satisfaction because they see quick successes. And then finally, they go to ownership. Now, it is at this stage where they're not just using AI, but they're also championing it. On the vertical axis, we begin from literacy. So everybody in the organization is gung-ho about AI, and they want to understand how AI works. Then they move to proficiency in being able to apply it, and then finally mastery, where you are co-creating solutions together and you are transforming processes. If you look at the curve here on this screen, at the bottom left you have AI pilots and experiments, where different individuals from different teams in an organization are beginning to build AI in small bits and pieces. You move up the curve and you see there are co-created AI solutions, and that's where I think most of us in our journeys would be today, where multiple cross-functional teams are coming together and building solutions. And then finally, you reach sustained AI transformation, where ownership and mastery collide. Now, what's important to understand here is the movement along this curve does not happen on its own. There have to be prompts injected into the system in order to make this real. Sparks that will help move along the curve. In the case of an enterprise context, those sparks are not just notification that we receive from our leaderships. They are actual signaling that have to be done by the organization at a structural level. Look at executive sponsorship, OKRs and rewards tied to individuals and to teams. Funding for the right projects, dedicated time and space for me to be able to experiment, without which I might not be able to adopt AI at all. And finally, obviously, training. There is a lot that can be talked about training as such in itself, and it can be a completely whole session for itself. I would want to make that actually real with two quick applied AI examples, the fog model that we just spoke about. Think about a healthcare setup. There's a hospital that has implemented an AI triage solution. Initially, adoption is low. Doctors resist the usage of that because their motivation is low. They cannot trust the recommendations. Also, ability is low because there is not much nuanced training that has been given to them. Now, a turning point in that journey comes when the leadership steps in and says, OK, we're going to give you protected time to do these experiments. I'm going to embed the outputs of these systems into the actual enterprise system that you have today. This is where the motivation, the ability, and the prompt all comes together, and the magic happens. So one thing is clear. Behaviors drive adoption, and behaviors are not going to happen automatically. We need motivation, we need ability, and we need prompts. That's a theoretical concept. How do we actually embed it into the system design and make it real when we are working on the AI development lifecycle? What you see here on the screen is a behavioral blueprint for AI adoption. Just as Dr. Fogg says B is equals to MAP, I say A is equals to TEC. That is trust, empathy, and change, which needs to come together. Now, this is a model that has been built by years of curated research, practical experience, and successes that have been seen in dozens of AI projects. And I will not use the word hundreds because I have not seen hundreds of scaled AI deployments that might have happened. Let's break this down one by one. We begin with trust. Believe me, trust is the single biggest determinant of whether an AI system will be accepted or it will be rejected. But the nuance is that most often when we think about trust, we think about it as endless dashboards and technical explainability thrown onto screens. That's actually an overload. Research says that when you actually give trust with transparency, not overload, with progressive disclosure, where you're giving out information at the right time, at the right stage, in a language and manner that I can understand, and couple that with default choices that can nudge usage over a period of time, trust compounds. The second element that you see here is empathy. You know, human relationships work in a manner where if my concerns are addressed, I might want to forge a friendship with you. If my concerns are not addressed, I will get alienated. And that's exactly what happens when humans forge a relationship with technology products. Most often, we have seen that when AI products and systems are rolled out in organizations, there are questions that come to the mind of people. Will this replace me? What if I begin to use the system every now and then and my boss begins to think that I am dumb? What if the output that is given by this system is not correct and I am held accountable for it? Empathy means identifying and acknowledging each of these concerns openly and designing for reassurance in the system. Who plays a critical role in this journey? The UX team, the UI team, who most often, I would say, are not the most critical elements when we think about data science as such. But they have a large part and role to play in defining and designing AI adoption. The third element here, which we talk about change, and before we move about change, there is an element there that we're talking about anthropomorphic cues in empathy. What are anthropomorphic cues? These are cues in a system that make the AI feel like human. So a human-like touch or a human-like attributes to the AI system. But again, a careful balance is required there. Small amount of human-like touch makes us comfortable. Research says that you overdo it, and then the system quickly begins to feel very uncanny and manipulative. So careful balance needs to be done when we are nudging people through the anthropomorphic cues. And finally, we talk about change here. AI adoption is not a one-shot journey. It has to be done over a sustained period of time. And therefore, we need to have small wins that compound into big trust. Top that up with social proof and champions in the organization who model adoption. And then cultural training. What works in Bangalore will not work in Berlin. And that is very important for us to understand when we are building cultural training. If you look at the adoption surface graph out here, you will understand that if trust and empathy are the foundation, change is actually the multiplier. If either of these two things are missing, the curve is going to flatten. And therefore, you need all of these three together at the right time to actually increase your adoption. Now, talking about trust, it should be understood that most often, like I mentioned, trust is assumed to be building dashboards. It's assumed to be throwing transparency values onto people in a manner that they just don't understand. And therefore, what we actually need is a change in our thinking of how we build transparency. Look at the screen. On your left, you see example of a bad transparency. And why do I say it's a bad transparency? We have a whole lot of tensor values, weight matrices, and technical details in the form of loss functions thrown on the screen. Let me ask you a question. How many of you here actually are able to make sense of this? Wow. Nobody at all? That's my problem too. You give me a dashboard like this, I wouldn't understand anything at all, despite running an AI engineering team. On the right, you have example of a good transparency. Now here, you have a fraud detection alert system, which actually flags transactions and tells you what are the reasons. Unusual location, transaction which is anomalous, and frequency mismatch. All of this together builds good transparency because now I have information in front of me in a manner, in a language that I can understand and consume and then take decisions. If we move to the second pillar of trust about progressive disclosure, focus your attention on the leftmost panel. We're talking about an AI loan decision system. It says AI recommends approval of this loan. And maybe that's just enough information for somebody who wants a recommendation and wants to just go out and use it. But then, for a more technical user who would want to understand why, AI recommends approval because of a stable income history, good credit score, high debt-to-income ratio. For the highly nuanced user, of somebody who is working in the compliance teams of organizations, the third most panel becomes important because that's where you begin to talk about the full model rationale. Whether it's benchmarks, whether it's feature weights, whether it's scores, everything available, but only on demand. When I ask for it at the right time and not slapped onto my face in the very beginning. Finally, we talk about defaults that nudge usage. This is one of the most overlooked principles when we are talking about adoption. or about building trust. There is a research that says that as human beings, we most certainly always want to accept the default. Partially because we are lazy beings, but also because the moment I see a default on a screen, it gives me two signals. One of safety and the other of acceptability to my brain. And think about this. What a powerful design concept this could be when you want to embed adoption of AI at scale. There is a completely separate branch of architecture discipline that talks about defaults in choice architecture when you're building any kind of technology products, not just AI. Out here again, you would see on the screen two panels. On the left, you have an AI assistant system, which is actually a performance review form. Not much detail, not much information provided as a default. It actually creates overload for the manager who has to act upon it. On the right, now you have AI-suggested defaults with rating, with recommendations, and that makes it easier for the person to either accept, reject, edit, or do whatever they might want to do with the system. Having closed the trust with 3 principles, we talked about progressive disclosure, we talked about transparency without overwhelm, and we talked about defaults that nudge usage. Quick 3 principles, each of them a discipline by themselves when you're talking about design theory and design principles. We then next move to empathy. Most often than not, when we're talking about AI systems, we begin to think about cold, robotic interfaces that are built. Out here also, if you see on the screen, on the left panel, you have scenario A, which is of a cold interface. It actually says diagnosis is pneumonia, and confidence is 94%. It's sterile. It has absolutely no acknowledgement of uncertainty. It does not keep the human who has to act upon this along with it in the game. On the right, you see an emotionally intelligent interface. It actually talks about the decision and says, based on the chest X-ray and clinical symptoms, pneumonia appears likely. I am 94% confident in this assessment. And then it does something very critical. It says, however, I notice some overlapping signs with bronchitis that warrant your clinical judgment. So it tells the user that there is an uncertainty. Remember, we are working with AI. There's nothing absolutely deterministic. So it gives that nudge. And then finally, it also talks about strong areas of indication, areas of uncertainty. There is just one shift that has happened. It has changed its tone from that of being directive to a tone of collaboration. The doctor now feels part of the decision process. In the first panel, it's as if the AI system is saying, you know what, I know this better than you. But in the second part, the AI system is saying, I'm here to support you. I am not bossy, but I'm going to be able to help you understand and think, and then you are the decision maker. You can take the decisions. Finally, we move to the third pillar of A is equals to TEC, which is about the change multiplier. I mentioned earlier, trust and empathy are the foundation. Change is the multiplier. If trust and empathy, T and E, are missing, no amount of change programs are going to help you. You may want to do as many town halls, as many posters, as many hackathons as possible. Nothing is going to move in the organization. And that is why I've framed the change multiplier as a flywheel. You begin with defining the adoption vision and telling your people exactly why AI is important in the context of the work that you do in your organization and in your team, which will be fundamentally very different from why the other company might be wanting to do it. So that vision has to very carefully be translated to everybody in the organization. That moves to early wins. Like I mentioned, small projects, early wins, but not really MVPs and pilots. In my experience, and I may be wrong, but in my experience, I have seen with AI, the moment you build the first MVP, people begin to think of that MVP as the final platform which they have to trust. If you have not been able to build trust with the first MVP, it becomes very difficult to have the trust built into people in your next releases. Adoption will not grow. This becomes a very big problem. And so therefore, even when you are trying to do your first set of MVPs, think about the scale, think about the adoption for the long run. Early wins followed by champions and social proofs. We all have leaders in the organizations whom we connect to, whom we understand to, whom we have an affability for. They could be the champions and social proof of AI adoption in the organization. Move to cultural tailoring. Usage of AI, the way it has to be built, actually designed, built, deployed, and then used in the organization has to be tailored to the local nuances, to the local regulations, and to the local people. Then you go to the training as enablement, take feedback from employees in the organization so that you can make changes to this flywheel, and then finally reinforce and institutionalize. This is a flywheel. Once it spins, it accelerates on its own. I would like to leave you all with a thought that I want you to go and ponder about. Bias is not a math problem. It's about representation. Transparency is not about dashboards. It's about interpretability. And traceability is not just a log in the system. It is building accountability into every layer of the AI system. If you can think about that and build your AI systems with the human as the center stage and center focus, adoption will follow. Thank you, everyone.